Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start the meeting now. This is a special call meeting to discuss the MFP, and we'll start off with a roll call, please.
Dr. Bofi?
Present.
Mr. Davis?
Present.
Ms. Edmondson?
Present.
Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Ms. Holloway?
Present.
Dr. Jones?
Present.
Ms. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones? Not in attendance. Mr. Rock?
Present.
Dr. Thomason?
Present.
Ms. Fauché? Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. And I'd like to note for the record that I didn't consult with Superintendent White before I scheduled this meeting this morning. He was already scheduled to speak at LSU, so he's joining us a little bit later. He is coming. All right.
First item is approval of the minutes from April 17th, 2019. Approval of the agenda. Excuse me.
Approve the agenda. So moved by Ms. Voce, second by Mr. Rock. Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Next item, approval of the minutes from April 17th, 2019.
Mr. Davis moves and Dr. Thompson seconds. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Next item, consideration of a report regarding the status of the minimum foundation program formula for fiscal year 2019-20 and a discussion of possible amendments to the MFP formula approved by Bessie on March 13th, 2019.
All right.
Motion to receive.
So moved.
Second. Ms. Voce, and any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. All right, we're going to start off.
We have.
I'm sorry, what did I do?
On the floor.
All right, it's on the floor. Okay. We have a motion yet on the floor. Okay.
To adjourn.
All right. This is, in case you haven't noticed, this is a little unusual, and we kind of stumbled through that. Well, I use we collectively for me, but stumbled a little bit through this morning. All right. Let me give a few moments of remarks before we start on this in a review of the situation. Bessie sent an MFP formula over to the legislature, and recently the legislature, the House Education Committee, considered it and sent it back to us with a request to look at the possibility of taking out the 1.375%. And the first thing I want to do this morning is I want to read into the record Louisiana Revised Statute 39:33.2, which is the minimum foundation program formula, return to the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education procedure. And it says, prior to approval of the minimum foundation program formula by the legislature may, by majority vote of the House of Representatives and the Senate, return the formula adopted by the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, and may recommend to the board an amended formula for consideration by the board and submission to the legislature for approval. That statute's been on the books since 2003. To the best of my knowledge, it has probably not been followed before because no one objected to it, but this year is unusual. This year, you know, for the last several years, it was an easy process for us. Easy in one respect, difficult in another, but it was an easy prospect for us because there was no money to give out. So essentially what we had was knowledge before the session started that Louisiana was in a deficit position and that it was unlikely that any formula that included a significant increase was not going to make it through. This year we're in a different position. This year, for the first time in recent memory, there are some funds available, and the question is how those funds will be distributed and you know, what the appropriate share is. So I say that to point out that I think that after due consideration from the MFP task force and the boards sent over to the legislature an MFP formula that, according to my best understanding, is not dead in the legislature right now for two reasons. The first is what I just spoke of, the House consideration. The second reason is that a second bill on the MFP is in the Senate side, and it came out of the committee the other day, and it will probably be on the floor next week, and there's a pretty good anticipation I think it's going to pass. So what ultimately will probably come out of that process is a conference committee between the House and the Senate to look at it. And I say all that to point point out that the picture, when we scheduled this meeting, was semi-clear and is full hazy now. So we really don't know what the outcome will be as a result of that. But we have the ability, if the situation changes dramatically, we have the ability to have another session. So we're not under any kind of a crisis to make a decision today. I considered canceling the meeting when that happened last week with the Senate, just to wait to see what happened. But I decided that I thought it was more important for us to go ahead and get public input today, and for us as a board to understand where the sentiment is with the groups that, the stakeholders that matter. So we're going to have the hearing today, and then at the end of the hearing we'll have a discussion among the board members as to what action, if any, we wish to take. And so at this point I'm going to open the floor first to any board member that wants to speak. You can see how excited we are about this process. So, all right, in that case, since there are none, I guess our next thing is to move right to the cards here. And I'm going to call you. We have 4 seats at the table, so the first 4 people I call come to the table, and the rest of the people come behind them and on the row behind them, and then just come up, please, as we call. All right, we're going to start off with Donald Sanjay, representing the governor. Then Michael Falk and Dr. Kelly Joseph, representing the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents.
They want to speak together. She has another card.
Okay, they're both going to come up at the same time, right? All right, yeah, I see that one. Okay. And Dr. Janet Pope, representing the Louisiana School Boards Association. And that will be the 4 at the table. And then behind them, Larry Carter, representing the Louisiana Federation of Teachers and School Employees. Sarah Vandergriff, representing the Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools. Deborah Moe, representing the Louisiana Association of Educators. Rodney Watson, representing the Louisiana Retired Teachers Association. I want to take a moment this morning to say how glad I am to see you in here. We don't see that very often. And Superintendent Scott Richard, representing Acadia Parish School System. Robin Heistad, and I know I butchered that name, I'm sorry, representing herself. Is that Deborah or Rivera Albert? And Sonia Gutierrez. Rebecca, is that Rebecca?
Rebecca.
Oh, okay. I can't read. All right. I think we'll go 5 minutes for each of the people there. We don't have that many of them. We'll go 5 minutes apiece, and then it may get extended if any board members want to ask a question and so forth. Let me ask board members' preference. Would you prefer to wait till the end to ask questions, or would you like to question as they go? I'm okay either way.
Wait till the end.
Wait to the end. Okay, so I'm going to ask all of you when you speak to not leave, just because we may want to bring you back to the table. Okay? All right, let's start off with Dr. Sanjay.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Jones, members of the board. On behalf of Governor John Bel Edwards, I want to talk about the MFP that you passed unanimously and sent to the legislature. Last year, when it became obvious that there was going to be additional revenue to work with in this year's budget, the governor prioritized K-12 education and met with a number of stakeholders, many of them in person, with him to talk through the best way to spend that money. And through that process and through the process that you had with your MFP task force, all of the stakeholders were able to give their input on what's the best way to do this. And in that process, there were a lot of ideas. Some were in line with what he originally thought. Some were a little bit different, and some changes were actually made throughout that process. But as it got to you through your MFP task force, it was pretty much a consensus of all the stakeholders, of all the people that were affected by the MFP. They all came to agreement that this was the best approach. And so you took your vote, it went on to the legislature. And in the process, there were some things that involved the state budget itself which is not your responsibility, it's the responsibility of the legislature. But the governor, through his Division of Administration, has worked through the budget process, has looked at amendments to what's currently there, and is very confident that this can be totally funded along with early childhood education, a lot of higher education initiatives. It's available. So there is no reason from a budgetary standpoint to make any modifications in this. I'm saying that just to say that what the governor requests of all of you is that you maintain the MFP that you originally voted for and then let the process take place across the street. Thank you.
Thank you. So now that means you get to speak for 8 minutes and 42 seconds. No, I'm kidding. Good morning. Is your mic on? Look and see if the little light's on.
There we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Dr. Jones and Bessie members. My name is Dr. Janet Pope, and I represent 643 school board members across the state of Louisiana. We would like to thank you for the original proposal unanimously voted by you guys. The effect of this action, if we continue with this resolution, it would help school systems with the 1.375% as needed. School systems have the mandatory health insurance, workers' comp, Medicare costs, which are not included within the pay raises. School systems have stepped up with the new content standards, with assessments, upgrading technology for students and teachers in the classroom. Our continued collective support is vital to achieving the first real increase in public education funding since this legislature took office. We stand behind you and the original funding proposal unanimously approved and submitted to the Louisiana legislature. And as Mr. Sanji stated, let's let the legislature decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you've got 12 minutes and 10 seconds.
Well, thank you.
No.
Okay.
Please identify yourself. I forgot to tell you that. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Joseph, and I serve as the president for the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents and also serve as superintendent for St. Helena Parish School District. At this time, before I begin, I would like to ask that all of the superintendents and their representatives to please stand. I just want to say thank you. As you all know, it is a busy time of year for us. We have a lot of things going on. We finished up with our testing, and now we are working on trying to wrap up this school year. So I want to thank them personally for coming out today and making that sacrifice to be here at this special Bessie meeting. I also like to just say a special prayer to our Vice President, Richie Strong. He suffered an injury and was not able to make it today. I want to also thank you for submitting an MFP resolution to the legislature that does three very important things. It makes an investment in our teachers, it makes an investment in our support staff, and it makes an investment in our students. That 1.375% that is in the MFP resolution that you submitted to the legislature is very important for our students and for our school district. For the teachers, they will receive that $1,000. For our support workers, they receive $500. And for our students, our over 700,000 students across this state, they'll receive around $38 million. So it's a good investment for our education system. You all know that we have not received the 2.75 MFP funding for the last decade. For St. Helena alone, that equates to about $8 million. So all of our school systems across this state have not realized that funding that they need to help improve student achievement. So we have to make and keep that investment in our education system. So I want to thank you for submitting that resolution that includes that investment in our teachers, that includes the investment in our support workers, and includes the investment in our students. And ask that you keep that resolution as is and send it back to the legislature. Thank you.
Michael Falk, Executive Director of Louisiana Association of School Superintendents. MFP is commonly known as Mike Falk's problem because I've been dealing with it, Doris and I, since 1990 when we changed. But the position of the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents is that, first of all, any pay raise must be included in the MFP formula. And the 1.375% increase in the per pupil in level 1 must also be included. The reason our position is this is because this ensures continued funding for the pay raises and provides a permanent increase in the per pupil amount. These are all needed for the following reasons: lack of funding for additional benefits. As Dr. Pope pointed out, Medicare, unemployment comp, and workers' comp are not included in the calculations that were figured when they did the teacher salaries. Insurance health premiums are going to increase. And if the teachers don't get that money, then it's going to come out of their pocket. We have curriculum needs, we have materials and supplies, we have resources, we have professional development that must be conducted, especially in the summer. Classroom supplies. We have increased spending for technology required by state assessments and accountability. And unbeknown to many people, there are some employees who have a teaching certificate and in a position that is not coded according to the resolution. But there's a commitment on behalf of school systems, because of their teacher salary schedules, that those teachers will receive the pay raise because they have a teaching certificate and it's going to be paid for by the district. And then we have not had an increase in the per pupil since the 2014-15 school year. That increase, 50% of it, was a supplement for teachers and the retirement costs that was incorporated into teacher salary schedules. The other 50% could be used for the districts on a block grant formula. Therefore, we ask for your continued support of this resolution, and as was alluded to earlier, allow the process to run through, because there have been times when this board has met on a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon before the close of a session on a Monday and Tuesday and adopted an MFP resolution. Hold firm to this resolution. Show the people in public education and people in education that you support them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And the next group, please, and don't forget we'd like for y'all to remain available. I guess we'll start from our left to right. We'll start with Mr. Carter.
Sure. Thank you, President Jones and committee and board members of the Bessie Board. First, I want to say thank you. Thank you for submitting the resolution to the Education Committee. We wholeheartedly support the resolution as it stands, the 1.375, as well as for teachers and school employee pay raises. And again, we want to say thank you for that, and we wholeheartedly support the resolution as stated today originally. Thank you.
Good morning. Debbie Moe, representing the Louisiana Association of Educators and a member of the Louisiana Public School Coalition. I want to kind of take a little different tact on this. We definitely understand that a prime consideration in education is the educator, whether it be a certified or a support person. And we thank you for acknowledging that in the MFP formula. We believe, I believe, that we need to go with the original MFP formula that was submitted to the legislature. We must make sure that our districts are healthy. One of the things that is important, and I think it gets lost, is the fact that yes, an educator is extremely important in our classrooms and in our schools, making sure that our schools are safe and clean for our children, but our parents expect that we provide for the kids, and that's what the district funding does. It makes sure that our buildings are kept up. It makes sure that transportation is available for the children. It makes sure that our children are fed, that our children are safe in their schools. We have to make sure that our schools, our school districts have the money to make sure that all of their operations run well. I think that the MFP formula that was sent to you by the MFP task force on which I serve is a really good plan that makes sure that our districts are whole and healthy, as well as making sure that our educators are being honored. Is it enough? No, but we know that there is more to come in the years that are coming. We want to make sure that our school districts are our partners. We cannot continue with the politics of division. We have built a formula that we know can address the needs of both the school district and our educators, whether they're in the classroom or support personnel. We must continue and ask the legislature to do what is right. This is the best plan that can make sure that it is sustainable and that we're not back here again next year asking for the same monies. We don't want a one and done. We want to make sure that investment in education is ongoing. We want to make sure that we are asking our legislature to continue investing in our children and the future of our children. We have to make sure our districts are healthy, as well as our educators are receiving increases in their salaries. Thank you very much for listening and for bringing forth a formula that I think does the job that needs to be done. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Robin Heaston, and I currently teach kindergarten for Livingston Parish at North Corbin Elementary. I'm here to give more of an insight of a teacher's experience in the classroom over my time teaching. I've been an educator for over 19 years in 5 different grade levels, ranging from pre-K all the way through resource 6th through 8th grade. Most might think that this would be enough to make for one extremely tired teacher, and I am extremely tired, yes, but not at all because of the students I've been blessed to teach over the years. I'm tired of believing in a system that is extremely broken, one grossly misguided at times by leaders who are no longer looking out for our most precious investment, that being our children and those who have their best interest at heart, their teachers. I'm tired of political tug of war that causes the most important needs of our children to not be met. When I began my career, I was not even thinking those making the most important decisions at times for us would do anything to make education the best for our kids. It only took 1 year as a young teacher to begin seeing a darker side of how things at times worked. I walked at the Capitol when Governor Foster was in office. I rallied under Governor Jindal's term, and to say not a whole lot has changed at this point with Governor Edwards is an understatement. Despite repeated promises that things would get better, teacher pay magically seems to become such a focal point right before re-election, and with the ending result of what is offered to teachers being insufficient. Being dedicated should not include the expectation that we are self-sacrificing to the point in many cases of being too close to poverty level ourselves. The large majority of my coworkers have a second or third job that takes them away from the little amount of family time they do have. That is so unacceptable and, in my opinion, very sad. I have a feeling that it's not a problem that many in office or that have leadership positions encounter personally. Beyond pay, we need to be trusted. I'm also tired of disjointed decisions concerning curriculum options that are forced down our throats from year to year. It is impossible to meet standards when programs don't align with one another and constantly change. We need to save the millions, possibly billions, over the years, wasted over years on so many changes, and trust us to work collectively within our local district to create solid programs for our own students, to have a say. we could put that massive amount of money towards pay and useful materials. We are highly educated people held to unrealistic expectations and have very little help day to day. Our effectiveness is based on that, whether it be from an SLT, a benchmark, assessment, or observation standpoint. I currently am working on an add-on that will not increase my pay in order to continue to grow as a teacher because I care for my kids and want the best for them. Many of the young adults taking some of the classes are so disheartened by the hoops they must jump through in the traditional education program, when current changes say anyone who can basically pass their practice is sufficient to teach children. Quoting Philippians 2:3-4, for all leaders, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of us look not only to our own interests, but also to the interest of others. Please be the ones to make the public view of Louisiana politics change and the view of education. Make education your most important agenda. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good morning. Sarah Vandergriff with the Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools. Myself and our Executive Director, Caroline Romer, have come to the table now many different places, from the MFP Task Force to House Ed to Senate Ed, and we're coming before you again today. We will always come to the table thanking you for your support for additional dollars, but I'd be remiss to also not criticize about how this money is being played out. While sometimes it is great or has good intentions to bring what we say is restricted funding allocations, in many ways that also creates a lot of harmful side effects that most people do not realize. When we talk about a $1,000 restricted pay raise for teachers, by the time teachers and school systems have to pay many of the different taxes and fees that come along with it, many of those dollars that will have to cover those additional costs will come from the general per pupil amount that the school systems receive. This money also does not include the many teachers that are paid not through the MFP funds, but through the federal funds, or your pre-K teachers that also have to be funded out of the MFP. So while it is very, again, good nature and good intention to talk about how we support teachers and the ways in which we support teachers, we feel like this restricted pay raise is just one way that we're also tying the hands of our schools. And we also feel that $1,000 is simply not enough. Caroline Romer was only one of 3 people that actually went to the table to say, if you want a minimum, or if you want a realistic $1,000 increase for teachers, you're talking about $3,000. Because by the time taxes and fees are paid, a $1,000 pay raise equals about $40 a month coming to teachers. We feel that all this talk right now is shifting the burden once again on the school systems. If we as a state really truly say we stand by teachers and we support teachers, then we need to start being more innovative. We need to start talking about the ways that maybe income taxes can be talked about for teachers. Maybe even student loans can talk about teachers. I come from a long family of teachers, and what they also complain about is the school culture. The fact that they don't have the best textbooks and technologies to teach the way they want to teach. They talk about how there's too many kids per teacher per classroom because the schools can't afford to buy another teacher to put as an assistant aide or to free up other teachers. They also talk about the ways that they are burdened by their college student debt, or the fact that they can't afford to go get that additional professional degree later in life. So when we talk about wanting to support teachers, there are many things that we as a state should also be considering besides continuing shifting this burden on our school systems. We repeatedly say we have to support the school systems through the 2.75% per pupil increase. At this rate we're going, we haven't done it in about 10 years. So even if we just do it every couple of years instead of every year, as is designed by the legislature, we will be in a better position. And we wouldn't be in this position right now had we been supporting schools this whole time, of where you're pitting basically education against education, or making school systems actually go into the debt or dig a hole deeper because of the fact that they are now receiving restricted funds. So we just say thank you for your consideration. We are glad that we're finally in a position to have more money in the state. We as a state have gone too long without prioritizing education, from early ed to K-12 to higher ed. But our position has always been state funding should be going to schools in the matter of the per pupil income. or per pupil increase. And if there's a problem with the local school district not doing right by their teachers, then you let those local constituents hold their local elected school board members accountable. So again, not sure if we can change your minds on this one, but I would not be doing my executive director justice if I did not come and relay our viewpoints once again. So thank you.
Thank you. Next group, please. And once again, we'll start from our left to right.
Good morning. I'm Sonia Fields Gutierrez. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for St. Helena Parish School District. So I'm kind of here representing our views. And as you heard Dr. Joseph mention earlier, just for St. Helena alone, without an increase in MFP over the last decade, that's an $8 million loss for our district. That's an $8 million loss for our kids. Something we always echo in the district every day is, are we doing what's best for kids? Are we ensuring every decision we make is in the best interest of our students? Our schools rely on funding to fund these unfunded mandates that we're dealing with. You've heard our kindergarten teacher allude to Tier 1 curriculum. We're bound by what vendors we can use to provide professional development. We're bound by specific social emotional learning curriculum, and we don't always have the funds to fund these initiatives. 1.375 is a compromise for our kids, a compromise for the children that are going to grow up and become adults and take care of us when we become older. They're going to be the ones working in our nursing homes, working in our hospitals, working in our DMVs. Do we really want to send that message to our kids that their education isn't important to us? We strongly urge Bessie to submit the MFP resolution as is and stay firm for our children. In a time where we're facing a serious teacher shortage, we have to ask ourselves as well, are we doing everything we can do to draw more young adults into our profession? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rodney Watson, Executive Director for the Louisiana Retired Teachers Association. We have over 20,000 retirees and 2,000 active employees in our organization. I'm here today representing retired teachers and the Louisiana Public School Coalition. You might say, why are retirees at the table? Well, our group came together some months ago, 6 organizations that represent everything from superintendents to teachers to retirees, and we said, where are the common beliefs that all of our organizations have? And that emerged with 3 basic areas: fully funding education, recruiting and retaining teachers, and teacher pay raises. So in that regard, all of us are at the table with that same agenda. Beyond that, you might say, well, retirees won't get this pay raise, but in that additional funding that you're providing in that 1.375%, districts are absorbing healthcare costs, and retirees in many districts are a part of that, and districts are paying that healthcare cost. TRSL is in a pretty good state right now. Our retirees, we have more active employees than we have retirees. You can't say that about all retirement systems, and that's always a healthier position. But as you're well aware, Louisiana has a tremendous teacher shortage. One way that you recruit and retain teachers is providing adequate pay. So this additional pay will not only help you recruit additional teachers, that's actually more teachers in the retirement system, which makes our system healthier. So on behalf of LRTA and the Louisiana Public School Coalition, we appreciate the efforts that you made and hope that you'll send the original resolution back as proposed.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Watson. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Rebecca Albert, and I'm a public school teacher here in Louisiana. Overwhelmed, unappreciated, underpaid, frustrated, unhappy, stressed to the max, worried, unheard, invisible, insulted. These are the words used by my fellow public school teachers to describe our profession in the state of Louisiana. I am a public school teacher going on 17 years. For the past 10 years, we, your educators, have been looked over, pushed aside, and moved to the back of the line, and we are tired of it. Our pay has not increased for a decade. but the cost of living has, and it is simply not fair. Let me tell you the kind of teachers that we are. We are teachers who pay supply fees, field trips, purchase shoes and hair bows. We are teachers that come out of our own pockets for Christmas presents, Easter baskets, and pass around a money envelope for families that have been through tragedies. We get our students ready for the leap and benchmarks in which we are held accountable. We provide food bags from our Mighty Moms program that cover basic needs. We are teachers who spend tireless amounts of time at home, away from school, completing lesson plans, researching, preparing, and worrying about our students. We have college degrees, pass state standards in order to hold a state teaching license. We are encouraged to join professional organizations, attend professional development, and go on to earn master's degrees and national board certifications. Yet we are not properly compensated for it. Many hats are worn every day as we teach not only rigorous curriculum, but teach manners, self-respect, life skills, confidence, and even how to tie your shoe. Our students are brought home with us every day in our minds and in our hearts. Now let me tell you the students we teach. We teach children who come from loving, supporting families who truly want the best for them. But this is not the norm anymore. More and more, we are faced with children who are not so lucky. We see children who step off the bus in the morning who got no sleep the night before. Our students come to us with mothers and fathers who are either incarcerated, in rehab, or addicted to drugs. Children today are entering public schools and are dealing with issues that exceed beyond our scope of training. It is well past time educators of this state be made a priority. Unfortunately, teaching is a dying profession. Very few young people are willing to enter into a field where they are expected to do so much with so little support and appreciation. The legislative back and forth over $1,000 is an insult. We are worth more. We are worth more than $1,000. I'm saying it, and we are saying it. A crisis in education is on the horizon, and the political games of chess that take place across the street needs to stop. For the sake of generations of this great state, the time is now. The time is now. Thank you.
You're going to have a hard time following that, Scott.
Yes,
I just
sir, I
want to
will.
make you aware.
Good morning, Bessie members, President Jones, Scott Richard, Superintendent of Acadia Parish School System. I want to thank you for your leadership in shepherding the current resolution to the point of where it's at now. And I'd like to thank the veteran stakeholders who came before you and us several decades ago to craft the legislation that places the actual MFP resolution in the posture that it's in now, making it a higher hurdle for the legislature to modify it. There's a reason for that. And it all goes back to what the previous speaker talked about, the political football that the MFP resolution has become, the political football that teacher raises has become in our state, the political football surrounding the most important priority for our state, which is educating our students. The entire legislation surrounding the MFP is designed to keep it from being a political football. You have done your jobs up to this point, and we greatly appreciate your leadership. We're asking you to continue that strong leadership and shepherding the current resolution across the street through the process. And we stand behind you. I do as a superintendent in Acadia Parish, and we appreciate your efforts. We understand the political pressure that you're under as elected Bessie members and appointed Bessie members. And I'll close with this. I don't think there's any more important gesture that Bessie could make today by maintaining the current resolution, especially during Teacher Appreciation Week. And I'd like to thank all the teachers in the room and teachers across the state of Louisiana for their hard work. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I'm going to call out the names now of the people who are in support but do not wish to speak. Don't y'all go away, because we're going to just sit down on the rows up front there. We're going to open up for questions in a minute. I have to read this other list here. I'm going to ask these people to stand if you're in the room as I call your name. Heather Cushman from the Louisiana Federation of Teachers. Darrell Fairborn, Washington Parish School System. And an old friend of mine from superintendent days. Jerome P.O. from, Jerome, did I get your name right this time? All right. From Vermilion Parish. Sheldon Jones from Richland Parish, another old friend. Paul Nelson from Tensas Parish. Paul. All these are superintendents, by the way, if you hadn't figured that out. Joe Murphy from Livingston Parish. Joe. David Gregory from Livingston Parish School Board. Okay. Rick Winsell, Livingston Parish. Rick. David Alexander, Ascension Parish. Lisa Tanner. Bogalusa. Okay, I should have known that. Scott Davila from Zachary. Scott. Sarah Ebarb from Sabine. This is really great because these are all old friends of mine. I'm getting to recognize them again here. Carrie, I know I'm going to butcher this, in Lavallee. Wasn't even close, was I? From Iberia Parish School District. Jeremy Cuvion from Assumption. Carlos Sam from East Feliciana. Joan Fountain from Central Community.
Jason.
Uh-oh, Jason? That's not Joan. Okay. Suzette Riddle from LAE.
And also they're proud 25-year head teacher of
Okay. Vermilion, okay. 25 years. Wow. John Galat from Caldwell. Hey, John. And you, Ted Reeves. My glasses are foggy this morning. From Union Parish. Hey, Ted. Thank you all for coming, and I appreciate it, and I wanted them to recognize that how many superintendents took the time out of their busy day to be here this morning. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
Point of information.
Okay.
You mentioned this in your introductory remarks, but I heard contradicting statements from a lot of the speakers, and I wanted to make the point clear that you had made before. I've heard several people say, please today send back the MFP as it was originally passed. If we do nothing today, there is the MFP over there as originally passed, and I don't want that to be lost, because we may end up doing nothing, and I would hate for people to leave here thinking that there is not an MFP over there as was originally passed. So.
Right. That was the point of me putting out that piece of legislation. I want to make it, not only to you, but I want to make it sure that the legislature understands that we consider the MFP that's over there to currently be there and to still be active and still be alive. And I think by the end of next week, it'll probably be even clearer. Let me also mention one guy that didn't put in a card, Keith Corwell. Stand up, Keith.
Oh, you did put in a card.
Oh, did you put in a card?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Come on, Keith. Come on. I'm sorry.
Shan didn't want to hear from Keith.
I gave it to him.
Well, you know, Keith, we just didn't have 5 more minutes is the whole reason. No. Dr. Keith Corville He's representing himself today, but he actually represents Apple.
Always, Dr. Keith Corville, Executive Director of Apple. So, I always keep it short, so I appreciate that y'all have time for me. And plus, my gosh, did y'all see those teachers? They were awesome. That's going to be hard to follow up. Let me just say this. The bottom line is this is something we should be pushing every year. There are clearly people at the Capitol that want to play games and negotiate with you, and I guess my only response to that is negotiate harder. Hindsight's 20/20, but if y'all had asked for 2,000 or 3,000 for teachers and even more for districts, I have a feeling we'd be in the exact same spot. So regardless of what happens today or whatever y'all figure out with them, I think that's the most important thing to recognize is a few things. One, the only way that it's permanent and it affects everybody and it helps me a permanent increase that addresses cost of living increases and increased cost on districts is to make sure that something gets in the MFP, and you all are the only operational force to be able to do that. The second part of this is, my good gosh, I think it's important for us to remember that while we're having these discussions and we get to dress nice and go out to the Capitol and Bessie and hear testimony and talk with people and sit in this wonderful audience with all these wonderful people and also hopefully have a nice lunch after this, the bottom line is the teachers are really stressed about this. We're playing around and playing games with people's livelihoods, with people's paychecks, and I think it's important that none of us here, there, and anywhere in between ever forget that what we're doing here affects real people and their lives. And I think the bottom line too is, again, like if people want to negotiate, push more. I can't tell you what to do, but I just have to tell you, if someone tried to negotiate with me like that, I walk out the car dealership pretty easy, and I always come back and ask for more. Y'all keep pushing. Seriously, this is the right thing to do. Y'all crafted a good MFP. Heck, send it back with double. I don't even know. Y'all keep pushing. Thank y'all for y'all work.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to, at this time, open the floor to the board members that wish to ask questions of any of the folks in the audience. And I'm going to save my question for, I have one question I'm going to ask every group at the end. So I'll start off. Dr. Bofi, would you like to start off?
I do. I want the representative, I think from the Retired Teachers Association. I have just a quick question for you. You gave off some figures and I wasn't quite sure. I think I might have missed one. And then I don't know who can answer this question, but what I'm hearing and know and understood this whole process is that there's a cost to districts above and beyond whatever is in the MFP. And I want to know, at a $1,000 pay raise for teachers and $500 for support workers, what that additional cost is for districts. And then at the $1,200 pay raise and $600 for teachers and $600 for support workers, I want to know what that figure is for districts, what that added cost is. So whoever can answer that question, I welcome them to come up. But I did have this first question. You talked about 2,000, and I don't know if you said members or
20,000
active employees. So you can be retirees or regular members, and then active teachers can be a member, an associate member. As a future retiree.
And you have some teachers who retired and came back to work.
But you used the number 2,000, and I wasn't sure.
We have about 2,000 active teachers that are a member of LRTA.
Okay, that's what I missed. Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Just want to get that clarity. Mr. Falk, can you answer that question about the added cost for districts at the different pay raises?
The current estimate that you have put into the MFP is for the salaries and teacher retirement for teachers and Louisiana school employees for the support workers. Teacher retirement is 26%, LSERS is 29.4%. The additional cost that we talk about above and beyond that's not included in the formula is for Medicare, 1.45, it's based on salaries. It's for workers' comp, which is based on salaries. Is for unemployment compensation, which is based on salaries. And then there are some districts that any increases in salary, there's a provision for health care, the percentage that the employee pays as opposed to what the district pays. So if that percentage stays the same, then the district is going to assume more. So, or pass it on to the employee. And if they pass it on to the employee, then what the net pay the employee brings home is less because they're putting more towards health care costs.
So what's the math Mr. Falk? Is it, I mean, it's 39 million when we talk about 1.375. Is all that 39 million required? Is it 3 million? Like, what's that number?
It's going to be different based on the
district.
District.
I get that.
But you figure Medicare is 1.45.
Okay.
You figure unemployment and workers' comps anywhere from 3 to 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the health benefits again are based on what the district does for the employees. Then you have the other issues that we talked about, other than benefits, the implementation of new curriculum, the professional development that has to be conducted. There's one point I want to clarify. There was, and I
You're not answering my question. I'm more than happy to have you clarify any point, but can you answer my question about what that dollar amount is?
No, ma'am, because
you can't answer that question.
I have to have all of the totals for all the districts and do a total.
Do you have an estimate?
I would say it would be between. It'd be close to $28 to $30 million at least.
28 to 30.
Statewide.
Statewide.
Let me add just a little clarification. There's a couple of points. Number one, the $101 million that was originally sent over is an estimate, but the actual disbursement of funds that comes out is based on the October 1 child count and the, was it January 1 now? February?
No, October 1, 2018. They
Right.
took the figures from the PEP report and used that in the calculation. They're going to do revised or revision based on the October 1, 2019 PEP report. So that number could either go up or down. It's just an estimate right now. And I think Beth, CNO from the department, can allude to how they calculated those figures.
What it actually does is it's an estimate that goes over. It's not an actual cost of it because we don't know what the actual cost is.
Right. I mean, that's how our formula works.
Right.
I get that.
If the population declines, then it goes down.
Yes.
But the other piece of it that's there is that in addition to the things like the deferred maintenance, capital outlay programs, and all those things that go with it, there are positions that are not covered in the MFP that districts have to fund out of, for example, some of the title programs. And they may not have the money in their budget and the titles to do it, so then the district picks it up out of the general fund. I've never known of a district that had one group of teachers in the district that didn't get the same pay raise that everybody else got.
So I told Mr. Falk that he can clarify the point, but then I want to ask Ms. Ciano to come up because I want to ask the same question of her.
That's fine.
Mr. Falk, did you have a point that you something else that you wanted to say?
I did receive information from Calcasieu Parish, and they calculated the impact to their district.
Yes.
Since 2007 with the pay, the per pupil amount, and based on the fact that the last time it was increased, 2.75 was in 2008, and then again in 2014-15, with no increases in between, $34 million. And that's from Superintendent Brookhouse.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before the speaker leaves, could
Yes.
I ask him a couple of questions?
Mr. Falk, please come back.
Good morning, Mr. Falk.
How did I figure you were going to ask me a question?
Just because, I guess, history. In the proposed 101 portion of the MFP, what percentage of that is to cover the benefits and the extra costs? I had heard it was 30% of that money was for extra costs.
That's close, because you figured 26% for teacher retirement and 29.4% for LSERS. So those two figures combined, you're looking at close to 30%.
Well, my point is, if it was 30%, which is what I heard, then there should be a couple of percentage points in there that could cover some of the Medicare or Medicaid, I don't remember which one it was, and the unemployment. And I was wondering, is there anything in there to cover some of that?
No, sir, because it's a simulation and it's based on an estimate. And when they do the October 1 PEP report, then they're going to do the actual salaries, and they're going to apply the 26% and the 29%, 0.4%, and that's all the district's going to get.
So
They're
the
not going to
MFP
get more than what is
They're not gonna get
required based on the PEP report.
So the MFP, as it's proposed, is saying that
more or less
we're going to pay $1,000 plus whatever the
That's it.
Retirement.
is. It's not
Yes.
saying plus 30%.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? We'll excuse him. Any other board member have a question? Yes, Dr. Brophy?
Well, I wanted Ms. Ciano to come up because I'm going to ask that same question of her.
Beth, okay, Ms. Ciano. For those of you in the audience that don't know, this is the money lady.
It's Ms. Beth Sienna with the department.
Thank you, Ms. Ciano. Do you need me to repeat the question?
I don't. I'm trying to get to the figures that you might need to do an estimate right now. If you give me a few minutes, I can try to get, we need the total amount of salaries in order to apply at least
Yes.
the Medicare percentages.
I think we're going to be here in a while. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Any other, Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, I had a question for Mr. Sanji, if he wouldn't mind coming down.
Mr. Sanji?
I guess I start by saying this, even though a lot of people are saying that Bessie should stick where it is, and Bessie should not compromise on the proposal, there's a good chance that a compromise might be required in order to protect the teacher pay raises. And I think that a lot of people, maybe not everybody, would agree, but I think a lot of people would agree that the teacher pay raises is the most important part of what we are addressing. But I don't want to speak for other people, but that's my opinion. But back to the point of compromising and all of us working together to try to achieve the full proposed MFP, we have a problem that I think we could use help from the governor with regards to. I believe, and I'm asking you to correct me where I'm wrong, that his original proposed budget included a certain dollar amount being recognized by the Revenue Estimating Committee, and their last estimate came in $19 million below that.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And the governor has said, I believe, several times that $19 million can be found somewhere. And I guess that means it can be cut from someplace else. Has he identified where it would be cut?
He has, through the Division of Administration, proposed several amendments to it's House Bill 105, Representative Henry's bill, and it is a large number of very small cuts across the entire budget. But they have found through that process that they can fund the MFP that you originally proposed, plus restore some of the cuts to early childhood education that when they lost the federal grant, plus a little bit more for early care that way, for higher education for TOPS. Yeah, they have budget proposals that cover all of those things.
And that budget proposal is balanced based on the current Revenue Estimating Committee numbers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board members have a question? I'll take Doris first, and then.
I don't have a question. I just have maybe comments. So
Okay.
is this the appropriate time or what?
I'd like to get all the questions out of the way first and do the comments.
Then I'll wait.
The lady sitting behind Mr. Sanji, I think you're a superintendent sitting next to Ms. Moe. I'm
Kelly,
sorry, I don't have
Dr.
your
Kelly Joseph.
name. No, next to. Yes.
She's an assistant
Could you back
superintendent.
up for just 1 second, please? You had, I kind of had drifted off, but I heard you say the word bound about 3 or 4 times. Do you remember what you were talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you
So-
repeat that for me, please?
In districts that have CIR or UIR schools, we're bound to use the Tier 1 curriculum. We can only pick vendors from the PD vendor guide. We can only pick behavioral interventions from the behavioral vendor guide. So if we're going to use competitive funds like the funding that we were just allocated through Super App, We can only choose curricula off of this list put out by the State Department, as well as PD vendors that offer different types of professional developments for those curricula. So we're forced to choose from this list of materials and vendors only.
I'm not sure your mic is on. Is your mic on?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess my question is, you're bound by the State Department?
To use our competitive funding that we, last year it was redesigned. This
So
year it's
if you
Super App.
don't do what you need to do, is there money tied to that?
Yes, ma'am. So we were allocated, so when we submitted our Super App application, we could either be not approved, approved without funding, or approved with funding. So in St. Helena's instance, we got different allocations of money through like an IDEA contract and Super
Right.
App. And so with that funding, we can only use the curricula off that Tier 1 list and the vendors from the vendor guide.
Thank you.
Yes,
I'd like
ma'am. Ms.
to
Holloway?
add to that, Ms. Edmonston. This district is not the only one that's faced with that. It's the whole state superintendents, and it has become a concern, should I say?
That's per ESSA. That's per ESSA.
All right, any other? Yes, ma'am.
To the teachers, the two teachers that had the courage to come up and say what they said, I just want you to know that besides Bessie, the position that I hold in Ascension Parish, I know what you're saying is true. And I want you to know that I hear you and that I believe in you and that we are going to work for you. I'm going to work for you. And I thank you so much, again, for your courage, because I know it takes courage to stand and say the things you guys said. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I've got one question I'm going to ask every person that here, so I want to give everybody a chance to ask it first. Okay. Oh, and let the record reflect that Ms. Kira Orange Jones has now joined us, and we're glad to have you. And I understand the superintendent's on his way, walking back over. Let me start off with Debbie Moe, please. Would you come to the table? And I'm asking this question for emphasis of every one of the major organization folks. I don't know if I'll ask you two ladies or not. I don't know if I'll put you on the spot.
We're ready.
You're ready? Okay. Well, Ms. Moe.
Yes.
Yesterday, the House appropriated an additional $200, or put it out there. It's not really appropriated yet. It hasn't gone through the process. An additional $200 per teacher and $100 per support person. And when that happened, of course, potentially that drives a wedge between you and your organizations and the superintendent's organizations and the school board's organizations. So what I want to know is, there's a risk if Bessie does exactly what everyone up here today has asked us to do. And that risk is that it goes to the legislature, and at the end of the day, it doesn't get approved, and then the teachers don't get a pay raise, they get a one-year stipend. Are you willing to take that risk based on what the testimony you gave a while ago? Is that something that you feel is important enough that we need to do what we're currently doing?
I believe that we need to be together. Our school districts are as important as the individuals who work in those school districts. We need to make sure that we are providing the best education that we can for the children of Louisiana. Parents want their teachers to be compensated, but they also want to make sure that their children are going to school in schools that can provide the best environment and the best resources that are available. I really do believe that we need to stick together. We need to move. We have to rise together. If we don't, then we are indulging in what I call politics of division. And I don't believe that that is good for the children of Louisiana. So yes, I am willing to take that risk.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carter? I'm not going to go through all that rhetoric again. I'm just going to ask you.
I would certainly concur with my sister, fellow union president, and that we certainly are willing to take that risk because we believe the governor has made the commitment, you've made the commitment to push forward in a way that we think is reasonable, that we'll look at a sustainable raise, not just a one-time supplement. We're talking about a sustainable pay raise over the years as opposed to a one-time supplement. I think that's political grandstanding, and we need to stop the politics.
All right, thank you. Dr. Janet Pope. Oh, there you go.
Yes, sir, Mr. Jones.
Are you willing to take that risk?
School boards are willing to take that risk because it is sustainable funding. The 1.375 will be every year, and the original raise that you guys included, the 1,000 and the 500, would be every year as well.
All right, thank you. Ms. Joseph, Dr. Joseph?
I don't consider us taking any risks. The Bessie has already said and submitted the MFP resolution that invests in our students, invests in our teachers, and invests in our support workers. So there is no risk that we're taking. The risk is if the legislature votes it down. They're the ones that would be taking the risk because they would be saying no to our students, no to our teachers, and no to our support workers.
Thank you. Mr. Falk?
I think you've witnessed a degree of solidarity and unity that has not been existed in the years past. Because of that, we are all for public education, and we will stand together no matter the risk.
Okay. Now, you all right. You two ladies, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but would either one of you like to? No? Okay, I don't blame you. Oh, you would? Oh, please, come.
Make sure your mic's on, please.
Okay. I can tell you, just from a day-to-day aspect, that the $200 we're discussing has pretty much already been spent in terms of needs to close out the year before I ever receive that money, if that is to be the case. Also, we were recently told that we have no money to purchase consumables that we year to year have the option to receive. So that's disheartening for me because as much as this is, promoting and it is advancing with a pay increase, to me it still is just such a small amount. So irregardless of whatever we can push forward that is going to promote change in the future, if that can be continuing and definitely not a stipend option, that is, I'm 100% supportive of that.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Are you sure? I'm here.
Is it green?
Bright green.
Bright green?
Bright green.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm here to say that
I'm here to say that I speak from my heart. And we have hearts every day that show up to school, and we deserve more. Plain and simple, we deserve more. And I'm hoping that we do get more every year consistently. And I guess that's it.
Okay, thank you. All right, the floor is open now for any, I think Ms. Boche had the original first comment, so.
Okay, you'd have to indulge me for a second. Mike Falk mentioned the original MFP study committee, and I think I am the only person still in existence in education who was on that original MFP study commission which developed the seeds of this current formula. The formula, as we brought consultants in, we developed this. A very integral part of that development on that per pupil amount that was set aside at that time, the critical piece was in a continual increase in that per pupil to take into consideration increasing costs, whether they be salaries, whether they be benefits, whether they be curriculum materials. There was much discussion on tying that increase to some indicator, such as cost of living index, CPI, some indicator that would be nationally recognized that would be built into that formula. There was push and pull with the legislature at that time, and I'm talking 1991, 92, back in those early days. We tried to get those types of automatic increases put in. few years later, we came up with that 2.75% that was going to be built into the resolution. We were hoping to keep it in the resolution. Times changed within the state. Revenues, things became very, very tight. Past boards and past legislators pulled that out and said, we're going to have to look at this on a year-to-year basis, which everyone understood. We are now in a position where looking at what has happened because we did not insist that some type of increase be built into that resolution. We would not be sitting here today, and I have to agree with Sarah over there from the Charter School Association. We would not be sitting here today if those percentages were built in, because pay increases for teachers were supposed to be built into that per pupil. The associated cost built into that per pupil. The retirement, which is a big factor for the employers to pay, built in. The technology, everything was supposed to be built into that. The teachers would be making more money. We had a couple of parishes talk about the impact just over the last decade. Think about the impact over the last 25 to 30 years that we're looking at. So absent that, I mean, we can sit here and nickel and dime and talk about, well, how much would this cost? I think it is a very sad situation when we're trying to pit the teachers groups against some other group in education. And I want to applaud everyone sitting here in this audience today to say we are solidly together as an educational community, that this has to stop. And we have to band together with this. This bit about, well, let's make it 1,200 and 600, and I'm sure Beth can come up with whatever numbers, but my down and dirty arithmetic says if the teacher pay raise with the associated retirement costs, say is $100 million, the teacher and support pay raise, and you increase that by 20%, because if you're taking 1,000 and adding 200 onto it, that's 20%. You're taking 500, add 100, that's the 20%. So it's an overall 20% increase with the associated cost. Then my estimate, which is not of the, I'm not privy to all the actual numbers, but it's approaching $20 million. So if we can say, as a state, we found $20 million that we can put in a little bit extra here, then why can't that $20 million be right there in level 1 and put in and protected in the MFP to pay for everything that everyone's been talking about? This Tier 1 curriculum that Kathy Edmondson talked with the Assistant Superintendent in St. Helena, when we are, as districts, told that we have to purchase this Tier 1 curriculum, this specific PD from these specific vendors, the specific emotional and learning packages from these specific vendors, and those costs are set in stone, that's a very difficult thing to have to do, and we're doing that if you're a UIR or CIR school, hopefully with some assistance from the Super App with the increased title funds, but it's not there. And if you're not a UIR or CIR school, you get no money for that within the district. And then as districts, we have to meet those benchmarks. As districts, we have to meet the technology needs for standardized testing. As districts, all these associated costs of payroll that Mr. Falk enumerated and probably under enumerated, and I mean, Beth is the money person and Beth can tell us, but of that $100 million, I'm assuming about, of the $100 million, about $80 million, probably a little less than $80 million is the actual salary amounts, because if you add almost 30% to it, then you're going to get right over 100 with that. But my point is, it doesn't really matter if the associated costs for that little bit of money is X number of dollars. We've got to look at a bigger picture at some point. And as a Bessie board, we studied this. We went through the task force. Everyone agreed at that particular point that this was the best that we can do, taking into account the state of the state, the financial state of the state. I know, Mr. Carville, we talked about, or Sarah may have mentioned, $3,000. Well, I said, well, let's make it 10 times. Let's make it 10,000. But we have to be reasonable as a body. And I think that the MFP task force and the debate that we had and the public input that we've had all along really reinforces that I think we put forth a formula that can work in today's environment for this year, with hopeful increases as we progress next year and the year after. But it is something that the entire education community is behind. It is something that this board has already considered. And, you know, in my opinion, as Dr. Jones has already said, you know, the formula is over there. I don't see any reason for any type of change or any type of vote for us to do this morning. It is that we have sent a formula over there that we have studied in depth. We have taken a look at what the climate of the state is, and we feel it can be funded. And I would hope that we would just take no action today and let that formula run through the process.
Thank you. And now I'm going to ask Mr. Keith Corbel from Apple, however, I never know how y'all pronounce it, who represents a large teacher organization and who I totally forgot to bring to the table to ask whether or not they're willing to take that risk. So I want to know, are you willing to take that risk?
Well, can I make some comment on it?
Can you what?
Can I make a comment on it?
Certainly.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, one, I just wanted to thank you for recognizing me in interest of fairness. And plus, I mean, come on, you were going to miss the color commentary? I mean, come on, right? So, yeah, let me tell you, I think it's almost a false question because basically people are asking us, do you want a $1,200 stipend because it's not permanent versus a $1,000 raise? That's not even a risk. And look, if I'm going to sell out everybody else over there, hey, superintendents and districts and school funding, the funding that goes to support teachers so they don't have to pay for stuff out the classroom, even though they already do. Look, if I was going to sell that out, you got to offer more. So next time you see Cameron, tell him offer more. So that's how you negotiate. Right. And seriously, if you want to risk, it's a $33 billion budget. Whether y'all are, even if y'all send it back to them double, I don't even feel that would be a risk. The bottom line is they have $33 billion to work with, and you're asking for, oh my gosh, not even 1% of that. So seriously, we need to start fighting more for teachers, for schools, for everybody, and we need to keep pushing because that's how you reward and recognize. Because right now we're in a situation where we're having to pay catch up. So negotiate harder. Y'all want to take some risks? Let's go.
Okay. I'm going to ask Ms. Ciano. I don't see her.
She was here. I saw her, and she nodded and said she was ready. While we're waiting on her, Mr. Jones, there's something floating around that needs some clarity about the Tier 1 curriculum. And so I think if Ms. Devlin could come up. I know, yes.
But before you do that, I want to add one thing to what Ms. Boche said. It's very obvious how cash-strapped districts are getting, because every day I turn around and I see another district that's looking to go to a 4-day school as a cost-saving measure. My neighbors next door in Avoyelles Parish just went to it for next year. I don't think people or districts make that choice because they have any other choice. And so I think that, you know, while it may look great to have 3-day weekends, I think that it makes a big difference. All right, now who's the lady you want to? Oh, here's Beth.
So Ms. Devlin's here, and then Ms. Ciano can come up to answer
Ms. Ciano,
the question.
would you come up, please?
But Ms. Devlin, the question I have heard about the Tier 1 curriculum being required, and my understanding is that is not the case. That the that the decisions are made at the local level. So could you clear up what that particular issue?
So the funding that is available if a school is using a Tier 1 curriculum or a vendor from the vendor guide or from the Behavior Intervention SEL curriculum guide, let me back up a little bit. ESSA, our federal law, has a pot of funding that is available for school improvement. It is very explicit in that law that funding that is spent on school improvement must be spent on evidence-based practices. And so what Louisiana wrote into our ESSA plan was that we would determine whether those funds were being spent on evidence-based practices by producing lists, instructional material reviews on Tier 1 curriculum, vendor guides that have shown that they are aligned to the curriculum and aligned to the standards, and then also in the third pot, which is the SEL and the behavior intervention. And so in order to meet the requirements in the federal law of showing that that school improvement funding is spent on those evidence-based practices, we align them to those lists that have been reviewed.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss a major shift, so I appreciate that. And then, Ms. Ciano, I had asked a question about what the added cost is for districts that was not already covered in the $101 million for teachers, that for the $1,000 pay raise, and then what that would look like at added cost at the $1,200 pay raise.
Well, I think a rough estimate at this point would be the increased cost in salaries. The pay raise, you would take that number, multiply it times the percentages noted by Mike, the 1.45% and somewhere between 3 and 5% for the other cost. You could be looking at anywhere from $5 to $7 million probably at a minimum for those costs. That are not covered right now. That's just a rough estimate at this point. It's hard to tell because the districts are in a little bit different posture, but based on those numbers, I would say at a minimum between $5 and $7 million, could likely be more.
So if the legislature would vote our MFP down and give a pay raise, which isn't a pay raise, outside of the MFP, for the teachers, and just did that straight to the teachers, it would be an added cost of $5 to $7 million, likely, at least, for the districts. Is that right?
Anytime there's a pay raise given, you're going to encounter these costs. And yes, right now, they're, depending on if they took away the 1.375, there would be no specific money designated for these costs. The districts and the charters would have to accept this as an expense.
And then, is it safe to then assume that if the pay raise goes up by 20%, then those added costs would also go up by 20%?
That's correct. Whatever percentage the pay raise goes up.
All right. And then the last question I have, thank you, Ms. Ciano. The last question I have, Mr. Jones,
Ms. Ciano, please don't go.
Is whether or not, or if we know, if we're going to have to come back, if we know what that last day is that we would come back as a board, in order to have time for any change that we would make to work through the legislative process. Do we have clarity as to when that
I think
very last second to meet might be?
I think so. I mean, if you really want to play brinksmanship and go to the edge, that would really be.
I don't want to go to the edge, but I want the pay raise in the MFP.
Right.
I want the pay raise in the MFP.
I understand. And I met with House legislative leaders last week. I met with Senate legislative leaders last week. There is a consensus that probably by about the end of this month, the first week in June, we have to do something. But there is also a consensus among them and us that we're not pushed to do anything in between. So I'm thinking that as the picture gets clearer towards the end of this month would probably be the appropriate time for us to do that. We could go all the way to the last day. It's not a good thing to do. I certainly it would put a lot of pressure on the legislature to do that. I don't think that's what we intend to do. So I would say probably by the end of this month we will need to have another meeting if we're going to make any change.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to do this, but I still am not clear. Bridget, could you come back up for me, please, since this has been brought up and I've had lots of questions.
Wait a minute. Wait just a second. In fairness to Mr. Garvey had raised, I think he wanted to speak.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So let's get Ms. Ciano first, and then.
Yeah. And then
okay.
Bridget.
Okay. Either way. But now that Ms. Ciano's back, a couple of questions. The $5 to $7 million figures that you mentioned, that would be on top of the $1.1 million proposed salary increase. That's what
101 million.
Right, 101
That's
million.
correct. Those are costs that are not provided for currently through the provisions that have been proposed.
Okay, that's not on. That doesn't apply to the 200, the new 200 proposed increase in pay for teachers.
That's correct. That would be an additional amount. That
another
$200
amount.
and $100,
Okay.
yes, would increase that cost.
Okay, now moving on to another subject, or similar subject, but a different point on it. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, help me with this, that 10 years ago, roughly, since it's been, let's use a 10-year time frame, since it's been that long since we've seen a increase in MFP. I believe 10 years ago, we were spending above the Southern Regional average, either at or above the Southern Regional average per student in Louisiana. And 10 years later, without an increase in the MFP, we are still spending at or above the Southern Regional average per student. How did we manage to stay in that same position as spending above the Southern Regional average, if that's true? Is it, where did the revenue come from? The revenue must have come from somewhere.
I think what was concentrated on the pay raise, on the changes that were made many years ago, was the fact that the teacher salaries we were trying to get the teacher salaries up, you know, to a certain level. And at some point we did come in line with the Southern Regional average.
I'm talking about the spending per student.
So the spending per student, you know, has three components. It has a state, federal, and a local component. Over the years, we've researched a lot of times as to why Louisiana might spend a little bit more than other states. And if you look to the federal dollars, you'll see that Louisiana is one of those who receive a lot more federal dollars. So we've been fortunate in these last, 10 years to receive a lot more federal money with regards to lots of things that needed to occur after Katrina. That could be one reason why that spending is still up now, as it was, 10 years ago. There has been an increase. I think right now, as I recall, we're ranked sort of in the middle of the pack, maybe like 28th or something in spending nationally.
Nationwide, not just the Southern Regional average.
I'm not clear right now what we are spending SREB-wise.
And that's why I said at or above. I would assume if we're at 28, which is average nationwide, we must be above Southern Regional, which I believe is below the national average.
Yeah, I would have to go look at the SREB average.
Have the local taxes increased in the last 10 years? Sales tax and property tax revenue to the locals?
That is correct. That is statewide on average they've increased. It is concentrated in areas of growth. Obviously, there are some areas of the state that have not been as fortunate with their local revenues.
And when that happens, the MFP compensates and pays more to the locals that are poor than it does to the locals that have seen more economic growth?
There is equity, yes, in the formula for those that have some needs with regards to their funding.
And do you know roughly how much the local sales and property taxes have increased in the last 10 years?
Not right off the top of my head, but they have been, there have been some real fortunate areas of the state, yes, that have increased their taxes.
Mr. Falk maybe could answer that.
Mr. Falk, please come to the table.
I calculated that the state has put in $3.4 billion since 2014-15, and the locals have put up $3.6 billion. It's all off of the budget letters that I reviewed each year. So it's now 50-50, where it's supposed to be 65-35 for equity, and I got those figures from the budget letters.
And that 65-35 is supposed to be state to local.
Yeah. And one point people need to keep in a framework here is any increase in the per pupil amount, 70% of it has to be spent on instruction.
That's so for teacher pay raises, basically?
Well, that's going to be into level 3. But if you increase the per pupil in level 1, 70% of that money has to be spent by the district on instruction.
And this is the first year that we've had an increase since, I think, 2008?
2014,
14-15. And this is a $54 per pupil amount to the base per pupil amount.
Correct.
And Mr. Falk, if you were to spend money on unemployment, insurance, and Medicare, Medicaid, whichever one it was, would that be considered money spent on classroom instruction?
Only on certain coded categories. There are some categories that you have employees in, but on the coded categories, it would be considered.
Okay,
Yes.
and could you give me the numbers you had before about what was the state portion versus the local portion? I think you said in 2014 versus now.
In 2014-15, it was a 2.75% increase, $69 million. One half of that amount, $34.5 million, went to a supplement for the teachers and the teacher retirement portion. That you.
I was asking about the state portion of the MFP total for
3.4
And 3.6.
and then 3.6.
That was the state portion. What was the local portion?
$3.6 billion they were putting up.
Back in 2014?
Yes.
And what is it now?
I don't have the latest figure from the budget letter, but
What I'm trying to figure out is how much did the locals go up? How much did the local contribution go up? You can find out?
Okay. And
Thank you.
Just to piggyback on that, at the inception of the MFP, it was a 67-33% split. So originally, it was 2/3 to 1/3. Then what happened over the course of the year, the state dropped down with everyone's agreement, Bessie, whatever, who was sitting at the time, dropped it, the state's portion to 65, the local portion to 35. And you have to realize the MFP is a minimum foundation program. And the word minimum is very important. And I think at some point in the future, and this is not for today's discussion, we have to look at what the actual cost of education is in the state. But the formula itself looks to what do we minimally provide. What local school districts have found over the years is that minimum is not enough to provide for the education of the students within their communities. So they have locally, or we have all locally gone out to the local taxpayers to say, we need some more. We need some dedicated millages. We may have dedicated it to technology or school security or pay raises or whatever the cost or whatever the item might be, which is, to Mr. Falk's point, where that local share is well in excess, total spending is well in excess of 35%. The minimum formula requires a local effort of 35%. Every community, every school district in the state makes that and exceeds it, exceeds their 35%, to the point where some are well over half with local money as opposed to state money, depending on where you fall. Now, as far as the Southern Regional average, one thing that if you look at funding formulas across the country, they are different. They do not all fund the same things. Some states fund certain activities, and if you notice in most states, local taxes are far in excess of what Louisiana is in terms of property taxes for education. So some of these states in their state funding formula only fund certain things in education, not as wide-reaching as what ours does. You also have to look on these comparisons nationwide on the poverty levels, the economically disadvantaged students state by state. Louisiana, the last time I looked, had the second highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students in the nation. And all of the research supports that the per student spending should be higher for the wraparound services and the services necessary to provide an equitable education for these students. So we should expect, in my opinion, we should expect a per pupil in our state to exceed what a per pupil might be in some of the comparison states that you're looking at. So I don't look at that as alarming whatsoever, especially on what we're mandated to do with those particular funds. And the mandates that continue to come down from the legislature and the state level to provide additional services, and rightly so, for many of our children. So when we're looking at funding, I would hypothesize we should be exceeding what that national average is, not just the SREB. but the national average because of the population and the characteristics of the students in our public schools in the state of Louisiana. So that is not an alarming number to me whatsoever, especially when we look at the wraparound services and the additional services that we need to provide for our students.
Mr. Garvey, if I may, and then I'll get you. And I haven't forgotten you, Ms. Bofi. Dr. Bofi, we're going to get back to you. I promise you.
Mine is actually Evanston that still needs you.
Oh, I thought, all right, but anyway, I'll get back to you. I want to point out two things. First, there's an old saying about a man with his head in the oven and his feet in the refrigerator has an average belly button temperature. When we look at what happens with funding, other states, I didn't get the laugh out of that I thought I would.
From one member.
When we,
oh, no, people are laughing. When they're laughing, that's a question.
But when we look at funding in Louisiana and look at funding on Southern regional average and the national average, as Ms. Voce pointed out, we don't fund the same things. In Louisiana, for example, we don't do things that other states do and put it in separate categories. Other states put out money for capital outlay, for keeping buildings up and so forth. We don't do that in Louisiana. So the capital outlay is an obligation of the local district. We don't put a nickel in transportation. Other states put transportation dollars in there so that the buses are not older than 20 years and so forth. So it's very hard when we sit down and start looking at comparing how states fund to it. But the key point that she said, and I think is critical, is the fact that the high percentage of students that we have from lower income levels, and the fact that it takes, all the research says it takes a lot more money to educate those kids than it does others. Okay. Now let me see if I'm lost track. Did you have another question, Mr. Garvey? Or?
Well, I did, but Ms. Skino's working on the
She bailed
answer,
out on you? You want her back at the table?
I guess it's not another question, it's another answer that I'm waiting for.
Okay, she's looking for it now. Okay, then I think, Mr. Edmondson, you have Ms. Devlin at the table, Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you, Bridget. You were talking about the evidence-based for the curriculum. Does ESSA mandate evidence-based?
Those words show up in ESSA many times, yes.
Repeat that, I'm sorry.
Those words are throughout ESSA multiple times, and they are specifically tied to the school improvement funding.
Okay. And how is the curriculum that we have decided that we're using in any district, how is that deemed, how is curricula deemed evidence-based?
So specifically with the curriculum and the vendors, it is standards aligned. It has been proven to be aligned to the state standards.
Okay, so that means evidence-based when it's aligned to the standards?
So studies have shown that when the curriculum and the PD is all aligned and is aligned to the standards that the students should be learning, that has been shown to be an evidence-based practice.
Okay, and studies. I'm just trying to find out who is deeming this evidence-based. The studies are from whom? We didn't do it here in our state, correct?
No, and I'm sure we could. I could work with the team to.
I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? If it's evidence-based, and I know that there's a lot of issues around this, and I know our teachers are pulling their hair out, so I guess I'm just trying to find out who deemed what we're using as evidence-based.
Right. I mean, I can go.
Can you find that out?
I could
maybe?
give you exact studies. I mean,
yeah, I understand.
Our intention is to identify curriculum that is aligned to the standards, identify PE that's aligned, PD, excuse me, that is aligned to the standards, and to help provide competitive grants to purchase that curriculum and that PD in our struggling schools.
What I'm hearing is aligned to the standards, and I understand that. I just am looking for more than aligned to the standards and really evidence-based practices in reading, in everything.
I do think alignment to standards is an evidence-based practice.
And PD is professional development, is what you're saying?
Yes, thank you.
You think aligned to the standards is evidence-based? Is that what you're saying?
I think there have been studies that have shown when the curriculum is aligned to the standards, the children are required to learn, it is a best practice that has shown to lead to student success.
Okay, best practice and evidence-based, that's not exactly the same thing, though, right?
Dr. Jones, Ms. Evanson, I don't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry, but is this pertinent to right now what we are on the MFP discussion?
It's pertinent because I'm in a conversation. Can you answer?
Dr. Jones, you make the call on that then.
Evidence, when there is a study that develops evidence that has shown that it's a best practice.
If you could find out the studies that we're looking at, I would appreciate it.
I'm going to do like the judge does here. Whenever that's asked and answered. Okay, I think the next person was Mr. Davis, if I remember right. It's been so long.
Just 2 points of clarification as I think we might be wrapping up, hopefully. But one, when the question was asked by Dr. Bophy relative to the cost for the matching costs that would not be covered by the raise in level 2, I don't think we addressed healthcare costs, which are outstanding. So she referenced $5 to $7 million, but that does not account for any of the healthcare cost matching. So I just want the board to be aware of that and not be stuck on the $5 to $7 million amount there. We did not clarify in your discussion, Dr. Bophy, with Mike Falk, on what those costs would be. I think apparently they range. I don't know, but I just want to note that that was not one of the numbers that was accounted for in that discussion a moment ago.
Can you describe to me how healthcare cost is connected here? Is that
I think Falk could probably do a better job of addressing that than I could, more clearly.
Many districts pay a portion of the employee's share for health care costs, and it's all based on whether it's employee, family, spouse, and things.
I'm familiar.
So those rates vary, and with the health care cost increase, there's 2 options. Number 1, you can pass it on to the employee, or number 2, the district can absorb those increased costs for the employee. And when they absorb the increased costs for the employee, then it shows up as part of their spending on like instruction, because it has to deal with salaries and related benefits. And then one point to clarify for Mr. Garvey, out of the $3 billion that you're looking at on the MFP, the current MFP, $3.6 billion, $1 billion of that goes to pay the unfunded accrued liability for teachers' retirement. $1 billion goes to pay that. Now, that's not something that you caused, but it's something that we as a district have to pay.
And the other point I would make to finish that comment up is not related to that, but and this may be something you're going to reference, Dr. Jones, but we do, the motion that we're working on is just to receive the report. So just to clarify for the vote, whenever that may come up, that we are just working on the receiving report at this point.
Right. Okay, I believe Ms. Boche is next. I'm sorry, Ms. Holloway? I didn't hear you.
Thank you. I do want to go back to the conversation that Ms. Edmondson had, and it does pertain to funding. Okay. And Bridget, if you don't mind, Dr. Jones, I'd like to ask Bridget a question. And I'm asking this because of the superintendents who have to be faced with this, with funding, and I believe that's why this young lady mentioned it in her conversation about the requirements and the funding source, et cetera. So my question to you, Bridget, in regards to ESSA, are the districts receiving less Title I funds so that the state can receive more funding for these competitive grants?
May I speak to this?
I'm sorry.
May I speak to it?
Oh, hey.
Let the record
Didn't know
reflect
you were
that
here.
Superintendent White's been able
Thank
to join
you,
us.
Oh, you're glad about that?
Happy to hand it over.
No, is the answer. What happened when Congress passed the new law is Congress took what had been 2 grants. One was Title I, which was a formula grant, and one was the school improvement grants, which was a separate grant system under the Recovery Act, but a competitive grant. And we were administering both. And they brought them both into Title I. And so what they then say is, now that you've got a bigger pie, we're still going to require that 7% of the pie be competitive. And 93%, which is the same amount of Title I money the districts were receiving before.
They're receiving the same amount?
Correct. Formula is the same. competitive is the same, even though the amount of money it used to come from two different grants. Now it's all been folded into Title I. And let me say this. I heard some of the discussion earlier as I was walking over related to the decisions about high-quality curriculum and so on and so forth. It is the obligation under federal law that the state education agency approve the plans based on some qualitative standard, and that the dollars be dispersed based on that standard. That's not a choice. We get those dollars on that condition. Whether or not that plan in a given state includes or look at curriculum is totally up to the state. But you've approved, and the Secretary of Education in Washington has approved a plan that does that. And frankly, my view is any plan for school improvement that ignores curriculum is ignoring a piece, to Ms. Edmonston's question, where there are years of research as to the relevance of curriculum. Take, for example, the research on phonics. There is no research to support a whole language approach to early reading relative to the base of research that supports phonics. That is a curriculum question about evidence and research. So we would be foolish to approve an ESSA school improvement plan in an elementary school that's submitted to us for a whole language ELA curriculum. Those are the kinds of qualitative judgments we're making. We are obligated. We do not have a choice to make them under the law. And that is what I believe Ms. Devlin meant by evidence-based. The amount of money is the same. However, Title I grew, and they made a part of Title I competitive, whereas Title I had not been competitive before.
Any other questions or comments from any board members?
Yeah, I have a question.
All right.
John, where do you get that districts feel that what they use is tied to money? Because it's,
It is tied to
this
money.
with, okay.
It's tied to money.
Explain that.
Well,
because there's such misunderstanding out there, and in all fairness to Tony, this is something that I think is very important, and a lot of other people think it's really important, and I'm sorry to take your time to discuss this, but you'd love to.
But let's, just as long as we don't get too far afield. Yeah,
No, okay, I'm asking John a question. Yeah.
So this year, we had $30 million the feds told us we could give away. They gave us $30 million, and under the law, they say you must give this dollar based on whatever standard was in your ESSA plan. Now, there's $500 million in Title I that we have no discretion over. The state agency does not. So that money just goes right to the district. The district decides how to spend it. The $30 million is the dollars we're talking about.
Okay.
Districts applied for $60 million. Now, I'll be candid with you. If we had $60 million and we were just able to give everybody everything that they asked for, I doubt we'd be having this discussion. But when you don't have the money that people ask for, you have to say no. And I understand, it's natural. People are frustrated when you say no. But that's all the money that we were given, and we have to have a process for what gets said yes to and what gets said no to.
I think that process is what the issue is.
Fair, but I think had the process been the same, but the result been that everybody got everything they asked for,
Well,
I don't
I'm
know
not
that we'd
saying
be
that.
having the discussion.
Maybe so,
So
yeah.
I have a question.
So my, if I may. So the question then is, one of our many judgments that we make in the process is, are you using curricula that have been rated highly by groups of Louisiana educators who have reviewed them? Those reviews are posted in extraordinary detail. They're posted online. There are dozens of curricula that are Tier 1. But there are other considerations too. We look at, for example, how are you training your teachers? We ask for those judgments. We look at, for example, do you have pathways to career and technical education? Do you have plans for struggling students, for interventions with students who are getting caught up? So there are many qualitative judgments we're making. One of them is curriculum. And look, I get it. When you have to say no, people are upset. But the standards for the curriculum dimension of this plan are as transparent as it could possibly be. There's just a list of them online.
Okay. All right.
I have one question in regards to this.
Okay. This will be the last question on this topic, by the way.
Yeah, in regards
Which is not MFP related, I might add. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it was prior to you coming in. She made comments, and that's what led to this.
Go ahead.
About the funding source, John. So, does everyone who applies for this competitive grant, if everyone applies, 64 districts, is it possible for every district to receive a grant?
Yes, and this year everyone did but one.
Okay.
And if there are districts that are understandably frustrated, for example, actually improved, and Tensas is very poor, very small, very low resource. They actually improved so much that their schools became ineligible under the federal requirements. I would be just as infuriated if I were them as they are, and we're working with them to try to find another way to get them other dollars. I think that has been the source of some discontent too. There are federal rules having nothing to do with the state that say that if you grow so much that you're no longer considered a struggling school, you're no longer eligible for money. That's ridiculous, but it's true. And so I do think there are some districts that are saying this school is no longer eligible, and I'm frustrated by that when the feds have basically said you can only have low-performing schools on the list.
Okay. Absent any other board members with a question or a comment, I'm going to summarize and bring this thing to a point. Okay, Mr. Garvey, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get by that easy. But
It's not another question. Just wondering if Ms. Skino has gotten the answer about how much extra revenue the locals have been putting up.
There you go. So Mike is right that in 14-15, when the budget letter was prepared, it was actually using 12-13 tax data. And in that year, there was a total of $3.2 billion that was utilized in determination of wealth in the formula. From that point until this year, in which we're using 16-17 tax data, it did increase to $3.6 billion. And on average, that would be a little over 11% increase in the local revenues that we utilize in the formula.
So
that is not going to be the case in every every district of the state, but it is a little over 11% change.
And it's $400 million
Yes. That's
extra
correct.
coming from
That's
the locals.
correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Last shot. Okay. I'm going to summarize where we are today and back on the MFP issue. Okay. We've heard a lot of testimony today, and I think no one came to the table to suggest that we should revise the current MFP and so forth, and we didn't have it on the agenda that way anyway. I would just summarize by saying I think our current position is that we have an active MFP formula in the legislature, that the status at the moment may be a little bit unclear because the Senate has one action going and the House has done another, and then there's a question as to what the House has actually done. So I think what's going to happen is most likely a conference committee meeting as a result of whatever happens next week with Senator Morris's bill. I don't think we need to do anything today other than I think the message will go out pretty clearly today that the consensus of the groups across the state is that we stay where we are, but we don't have to do anything today. And I will promise you that if the situation changes or becomes clear and necessitates an action by us, then I will ask to schedule another special call meeting in an appropriate amount of time before the end of the legislature so that nobody gets jammed at the minute. And I would suggest that's probably somewhere around the end of this month, would you say? Would be a reasonable time to do that. So if it gets clearer, well, then we'll take action. Okay. So now we have a motion to receive the report. Is there any objection to that motion? All right. The motion carries. Now I'm going to advise the audience that we're going to take a recess for lunch. When we come back, we're going to probably go into executive session. So unless you just want to sit here and watch an empty podium, you probably don't need to come back. But
Can we do item 4.2, Dr. Jones?
wait a minute. Hold it.
That's not going to involve them,
What's item
necessarily.
4.2?
Just consideration of a nominee to be submitted and recommended to the governor for appointment to the Board of Supervisors of the LCTCS.
Do we
I'll
have a
make
minute
that
for
motion.
All right. Mr. Davis?
This is
Second.
All right. We got a motion and a second. Okay. And do we have a name?
Helen Carter. She's a continuation of our previous appointment.
Any objection to the appointment? Hearing none, motion carries.
Are we doing a roll call vote after lunch in order to go into executive
Yes, we have to do that when we come back.
Oh, we could do it now.
I'll do it when we come back. I mean, that's all we're going to do is walk back in here and do it. Then
We have to vote to go into executive, don't we?
yeah, we are. We're just doing lunch.
Oh, we're having lunch now.
We're having lunch now. The meeting is back in session. I need a, oh yeah, we got one. Our attorney.
Need a motion?
I need a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Mr. Davis, I need a second. Ms. Boche, any objection to the motion?
Do we have to do a roll call for that?
Yes, do a roll call.
Dr. Bofi? Yes. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Edmonston? Yes. Mr. Garvey? Yes. Ms. Holloway?
Here.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Ms. Orange Jones? Mr. Rock? Is that a yes?
You need a yes or a no?
Say yes.
Yes. Okay.
Dr. Thomason?
Yes.
Ms. Voce?
Yes.
Dr. Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes.
We call the session back to order. Let's see, do we need to do a roll call again before we start? All right.
So moved.
I need a motion to reconvene. So moved by
So
Mr.
moved.
Davis.
Second.
Second by Ms. Bofi. Any objection to the motion? Okay, motion carries. And I don't think that we need any motion to discuss what happened in the executive session.
No.
So I think our next motion then is to
Adjourn.
adjourn.
So moved. Second. Let's go.
Dr. Bofi, do I have a second?
Second.
Any objection to the motion? Mr. Davis is a second. And the meeting is adjourned.